This is the China-Hollywood Greenlight podcast, episode 14.
And rolling sound. Quiet.
Here we go. Ready.
Speeding. 120, take 7.
And action.
This is Karen McCann, the host of the China-Hollywood Greenlight podcast, a podcast about creating and distributing content for both Hollywood and China. Any links mentioned in the podcast can be found in the show notes at chinahollywoodgreenlight.com/podcast and look for this episode, which is number 14. If you like the show, please go to iTunes, subscribe, and leave a rating so other like-minded people can find this podcast. A quick update on what I'm working on. I just got back from the Hong Kong film market last week and met with various production companies. I'm pleased to tell you that a couple of them said they could co-finance 3 of my projects. One wants to give me a contract and spelled out how much they could invest. Now, I'm not exactly breaking out the champagne just yet because even contracts in China are not the same as they are in the U.S. And I think if you listen to the past few podcasts, you heard that from various experts. However, it is a nice pat on the back. Number 2, I'm talking to a director who has a financing deal with the studio, so hopefully I will get news from him soon. And number 3, I'll be spending the next several days doing follow-up from the Hong Kong film market. Despite getting great feedback from interested investors, I don't intend to sit back and wait. I'm still talking to several firms and will keep moving ahead. However, things do seem to be moving ahead faster than expected, so if anyone can recommend a China-Hollywood-minded manager or agent, please drop me a line at info@chinahollywoodgreenlight.com. Before I introduce today's guest, I'd like to start out with a motivational quote to encourage our listeners to continue on their path to achieving their own green light. And today's quote is from Ray Goforth, and that is his last name, and it's a wonderful last name. And he said, "There are 2 types of people who will tell you that you cannot make a difference in this world. Those who are afraid to try, and those who are afraid you will succeed." Now for the main segment. Here is the interview. Today I interview Robert Cain. Here you go. Today's guest is Robert Cain. Robert Cain's experience in China and in Hollywood spans nearly 3 decades and dozens of films. As a studio executive and consultant, he has managed development, financing, marketing, and distribution for such successful films as The Usual Suspects, Bound, Breakdown, Blade 2, Cabin Fever, and the Russian box office success Mongol, which was nominated for the 2008 Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film. Mr. Cain also executive produced and raised funding for several pictures that were released theatrically in the U.S., most recently the horror thriller film Abattoir, directed by Darren Lynn Bousman, who did Saw 2, 3, and 4. He is currently in pre-production on his next Chinese feature film, Chungking Wedding, which he wrote and will produce in southern and western China. He has been doing business in China since 1987, wow, and consulting to major Hollywood studios, animation companies, and talent agencies on China matters. Rob's consulting clients include Shanghai Media Group, China Central Television, CCTV, China Film Group, Tencent, QQ, Taiwan's Ministry of Culture, and others. He holds a bachelor's degree with honors from Harvard and an MBA degree with honors from the Wharton School of Business. Mr. Cain is a frequent speaker at such institutions as Harvard Business School, Harvard University, UCLA, USC, and dozens of entertainment industry conferences, including Digital Hollywood. He wrote for Forbes from 2015 until 2018, and he is co-founder of ChinaFilmBiz.com. Wow, that is a lot. That's just scratching the surface. Well, welcome, Robin, and thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Karen. I'm very happy to be here with you.
Well, I only gave a brief glimpse of your background to the audience, but why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself personally and your business?
All of that can really be boiled down to a couple of things that I do day to day. One of them is advising, consulting to companies, both in China, looking to develop their business within China and also overseas. And then I do a lot of work with international companies outside of China, helping them to enter the market, find partners, raise capital, and expand their businesses there. And then I'm also on the creative side as a writer, a screenwriter. I do, as you mentioned, I was writing for Forbes until just recently, last month. And I am also producing projects that I write.
Oh, wow. Wow. Oh, well, I usually ask people, my first question is, why do you want to enter the China market? Well, you've been in the China market for decades, so
a little while, yeah.
So let me change the question a little bit. What is it about China that made you want to dedicate your career to it? What keeps you coming back?
Yeah, it's been a lifelong interest, Karen, really since I was a kid. And not that I had never been to China, but when I was 12 years old, sort of a bolt of lightning, an epiphany, I don't know, I decided that I wanted to pursue China, learn everything I could about it. I wasn't really thinking about making movies, but I had enjoyed the few movies and TV programs I had seen from China, and the Chinese food and art, and got little bits of exposure here and there. And so literally when I was 12 years old, I decided that's what I wanted to do. And when I went to college, I focused on Chinese language and East Asian studies. I've forgotten, I have to admit, a lot of that, but it's been a lifelong pursuit for me.
Wow, that's fascinating. Now, you kind of hinted at in your intro about because my next question is, what are 2 or 3 main tasks you do on a typical day? Can you kind of expand on when you say you find partners for, like, for example, American companies and Chinese companies, you raise capital. Can you tell us more about your typical day?
Sure. Well, yeah, I can talk about my day today so far, which began after midnight with a call to China. And in fact, with one of your former guests, a friend of mine, Brendan Davis.
Oh,
and,
great.
We were talking about our respective projects and our respective consulting businesses and the possibilities of collaborating in some ways. So that, I guess I went to bed around 1 a.m. or 2 and then got up for a call with a new potential client, someone who has successfully built and operated sound stages and production facilities here in the U.S. and has some ideas about doing the same thing in China. Oh. And I was able to tell him, well, yeah, I've worked in the stage business. I've certainly got a lot of connections in government and in production and visual effects and with talent and all of those things. So we're talking about the idea of him engaging me, his company, to help them develop a strategy, develop a pitch for investors, and then to identify the right people in China to talk to, government officials to begin with, and then potential clients and customers, and I can make the connections for him with TV companies and film production companies that need stage facilities. So that was one of my calls. Another call this morning was with a Chinese distribution company that's looking to invest, looking for projects and feature film projects, and also investment opportunities here in the United States. So I pitched them a few ideas. They also have seen my slate of projects, things that I've written, and they've been interested in a couple of those. So we'll see. Maybe I can close some funding with them.
Okay, and then you also do the opposite.
That brings us up to.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that brings us up to what, 11:30 this morning.
That's not even lunchtime yet. And so, do you do the same for like American producers looking for Chinese financing?
Yes, very often I will do that. Financing out of China has become trickier. It's harder and harder to get money out of the country into the U.S. So more of what I'm doing, although I still do that kind of work, more what I do these days for international companies is helping them to find their footing, to enter the market in China. and to get themselves up, everything from kind of the legal aspects. I'm not an attorney, but I know a lot of the basics of setting up a company, finding partners there, collaboration, co-financing, co-production, those kinds of things.
Oh, okay, great. Well, you have a lot of experience of finding Chinese business partners, but tell us kind of in a nutshell of how do you find your business partners, and how do you suggest the listeners find a Chinese business partner?
Yeah, there's no magic to it. For me, it's been many years. So I do have the advantage of lots of years of many meetings and relationships I've developed over the years. But even if you're starting from scratch, the principle is really the same. I'm a part of a number of networking groups that have been very valuable to me. And so that's one way to establish contacts. I'm always handing out business cards and my WeChat ID, and connecting with people, and do a pretty good job, I think, of maintaining a database of contacts. So when a specific problem or question or challenge arises, either I will already have someone in my network, but in the cases when I don't, I reach out to people that I know as a priority, and sometimes, very often, I'll just call people cold. I find that in China, it's very different than here. When I say here, I mean in Hollywood. I'm speaking from Los Angeles, where the entertainment industry tends to be very stratified, hierarchical, and it can be a challenge just to reach the right person. Whereas in China, I find it's much more open, much more, especially to people like me coming from Hollywood or coming from overseas. If I needed to set up a week of meetings in Beijing without knowing anyone, I'm pretty confident I would be able to do that, and just by making calls and sending emails and getting in touch with people over there. So,
your reputation precedes you, so that definitely helps.
I think that helps, but very often I'm in touch with people who haven't heard of me or don't know who I am. And as long as you can tell a good story, you can talk your way, I think, into pretty much anybody's office.
Okay. Well, just a side question. When you're calling China, do you need to speak Chinese?
I do speak some Chinese. As I mentioned, I learned in college, but generally speaking, no, I don't. I'm not that confident in my business Chinese. It's really not strong enough. So usually I'm communicating in English, and I might do an intro where I use a few words of Chinese just in case the person doesn't communicate in English. But I find generally in the entertainment industry, especially the younger generation, people, let's say under 40 or 50, most speak English to some degree.
Oh, okay. That's good to hear. Now, tell us a little bit about an obstacle that you encountered on a past project. How did you overcome it, and what did you learn?
Let's see. Well, there's a story I tell about a movie, a romantic comedy I was a producer on, where we were shooting in Shanghai. This was about 10, 11 years ago. And things were going along fine. It was shot half here and half in China. And so we were in the middle of our China shoot. And at the end of one of our days, we had a scene that was shooting it wasn't actually a movie theater, but we mocked up a stage to look like a movie theater. And our two male and female lead characters were just having a conversation in the theater. And then, so we wrapped, we were fine. And somebody suggested, well, why don't we do one more take just as a joke? And we'll have someone in the background with a video camera taping the movie off the screen.
Uh-oh.
And we all sort of laughed at that and said, sure, isn't that funny? Ha ha. So we shot one take of that, and then we were done for the day. Well, what I learned very quickly thereafter was that the Chinese government, this was in Shanghai, and the local office of SARFT had placed at least one spy on our set.
Oh,
we didn't know who it was, never did find out who it was. But they reported dutifully that we were doing, we were portraying an act of film piracy. in China.
Oh,
So
no.
when we showed up on the set the next day, it was a different location, but they knew exactly where to go. There was an official from SARFT telling us we were shut down
Oh,
and
no.
did not have permission to shoot any more in China,
Oh, my gosh.
which was horrifying, of course. We were, I think, about halfway through our shoot. And, well, what do we do in a situation like that? We
Yeah.
weren't about to just pack up and go home. The movie would be ruined. So we sort of crawled back to that office and very humbly explained how we were, basically dumb foreigners. We didn't know what the rules were. We didn't mean any offense. They told us, it was really silly. They said, you can't show piracy. There's no such thing as piracy in China.
Yeah, right,
And
right.
so we had to kind of nod our heads and agree to that silliness. But it turned out, what I learned was you do have to be very careful, respectful of the local laws. We didn't think we were doing anything wrong, but we didn't know. And I learned that this government bureaucracy, which seems big and nameless and faceless, well, we made the right appeal. The person we were talking to was a human being, and took some sympathy and said, if you screw up again, you're gone for sure. But gave us permission, and by the end of the day, we were back and shooting again.
Wow, that must have been quite an experience. You have to go.
Heart-stopping, yes. Really nerve-wracking.
Well, okay. Well, speaking of heart-stopping, it doesn't. This next question, a little bit. It doesn't have to be as quite as dramatic. But if you could magically solve two current problems, what would they be?
Two current problems? You mean in China?
I mean that you're facing with the China-Hollywood film business.
Okay. Well, yeah. Here's one. If I could wave a magic wand, I would love to see China and people in the industry in China have more of an appreciation for the written word, for quality screenplays, and understand how crucial a good story, a well-told story with empathetic characters and obstacles and a 3-act structure. That just, in all the years I've been working at that, I still don't see much understanding of why that's important or appreciation for it. And I see it. I think it's the reason. It's my maybe biased opinion, but I just don't think China is making good movies at all. And occasionally an accident happens and a good movie gets made, but most of them are not good. And to me, the fundamental underlying issue is that lack of understanding or appreciation for a good screenplay. So that would be one thing.
Okay.
I don't know how you solve that problem, but I continue to work at it, and I just hope making good movies with good stories will help sort of light the way for for Chinese producers there.
And a second pain point?
Second one, well, I guess I'll dance a little bit into a political issue, but I would. The Chinese government's approach to entertainment is largely obstruction. They do things to support, and I have to credit, they do things to support the industry, and I don't want to dismiss all of that, but it's one of the few places in the world I've worked where the government is more of an adversary than an ally in getting things done, in getting permission to shoot, getting permits, getting financing, getting production approvals, distribution, all of that. I find that every step of the way, the Chinese government is typically standing in the way. Korea had I've also done some work in Korea, and back in the early to mid 90s, they had similar sorts of censorship and government control over the industry. And they, over the course of just a very short period of time, they eliminated all those censorship restrictions and invested in the industry and encouraged, well, maybe even forced corporate entities to invest. And like magic, things turned around. Korea is now a leader in production of TV series and popular music and movies that are embraced by the world. So I think there's a really good example for China there. And if I could have my wish, I would have them pursue that same approach that Korea has.
Just a side question. You've got your ear to the ground, and we all, Korea, like you said, has a fantastic history of film, and they really do cross borders with the THAAD kerfluffle, and how China a year ago said, we're kind of basically cutting off Korean entertainment. About a month or two ago, there was some hoo-ha about China might slowly open the door for more Korean. Not working together maybe again. Is there anything new going on? Has anyone said, let's bring in some Korean stars, or are they even open to making movies with Koreans again, or is that still?
Yeah, it gets very political. Yeah, what you're referring to is the Chinese government really slapped down all of Korea's entertainment imports to China. It had been, I would say, the most popular source of TV and popular music coming into China. And they just make really good, entertaining stuff. And after this, Korea agreed, or was maybe strong-armed by the U.S. government into placing those anti-nuclear missile defense capabilities, China just cut off all the imports from Korea. It was kind of a blow to the Korean industry. And yes, things started to loosen up. And here's what, with my second wish, I just wish the Chinese government would get out of the way. But now, just as things were starting to thaw a bit, I heard that because a Korean referee or official at the Olympics accused a Chinese athlete of cheating, which they were provably and demonstrably doing. The Chinese government decided to double down and said Korea is, is off limits again.
Oh, no.
So it can seem very capricious and arbitrary. But, these people have the power to do what they do. So,
let's go ahead.
So I don't think Korea is quite back yet. These things get forgiven over time, but it might take a while.
Okay. Well, speaking of over time, what sort of future projects? Now, I know you write your own projects. So my question usually is, what sort of future projects are you looking for, and what do you think the Chinese studios are looking for? I should qualify that by asking, do you look for projects, or is it strictly projects you write yourself?
Well, with regards to China, not so much. I'm able to supply myself pretty well. As it happens, I'm going to India on Friday for a couple of weeks, and I am involved in other people's projects there, including a few that we're looking to set up as India-China co-productions.
Oh, wow.
So that's interesting. As for, I used to look for projects and scripts that could be sources of co-productions, but I've found increasingly over the last few years, those, especially coming from American producers, those are just incredibly difficult to pull off, co-productions between American and Chinese companies. So I'm less focused on that, more focused on domestic Chinese stories. And sure, if there's a great script, a great project or package out there, chances are I can help with it. So I'm not saying I don't look for those things. I'm certainly open to it, but I have my hands pretty full these days with things that I've written and things that I'm producing myself.
And what do you think the Chinese studios are looking for?
Well, they're looking for projects that work. I think I don't want to paint a broad brush, but I would say, in my experience, many of the companies are pretty short-sighted, and they're looking, this worked last week or last month, so give me those projects. They're not that different from Hollywood in that respect or other places. So there was a romantic comedy that just finished its run last month, X-File 3. It did somewhere around $310 million in box office on I think it was probably a $4 or $5 million budget. So that's pretty nice. There are increasingly, they're doing bigger budget productions. It's a little bit hard to justify those, but some of them do work. China's had a huge week at the box office this past week and a half, where 3 films are now going to go over $300 million in box office each. And one of them, I think, is going to go over 500 million. So action is always in demand. Interesting sci-fi, romantic comedies and comedies tend to work, and those are nice when they do because they're cheap.
And in what language are they? Are they open to English, or is it strictly they're looking for Chinese language projects?
Yeah, there are. So the conversation I mentioned that I had this morning with the distribution and exhibition company, they're looking for English language projects that can shoot either in the U.S. or in China. Mostly, though, what I'm focused on is Chinese language films. The domestic market is so big and has so much opportunity that you can do just focus on serving that market, and you can do pretty well.
And you a minute ago you said it's difficult to pull off an American-Chinese co-production. Is there anything you see routinely that makes things so hard to pull off?
Well, again, it's the government regulation and attitude towards co-productions. They're very welcoming of co-production, what they call, co-productions, foreign co-productions, Hong Kong, China co-productions, which is really just China. But there was a successful India-China co-production with Kung Fu Yoga last year, the Jackie Chan starring film. But there are, I don't want to go into all the detail about the regulations, but there are quite a few rules and I would say some obstacles too to pulling those off, especially if you're an American. But generally speaking, if you're a foreigner trying to work in China, it's tough, and it's been getting tougher.
Would a solution to that be just take your project and rework it so it's a Chinese domestic film? I mean, you may have a couple foreigners in the cast, but you could shoot it in English or in Chinese.
Well, yeah, it depends. I would say that if you have a project that wasn't written for China, that was specific to some other place, I haven't ever seen those work where people take a script that maybe has a good story and try to shoehorn it into Chinese settings and Chinese characters. Right. I find the things that work creatively and have the most potential are projects that are designed from the bottom up with China in mind and with Chinese. So that's really been much more my focus. I haven't really, I personally haven't had any success in taking projects that originated elsewhere and fitting them into China. I've been designing projects from the start for China. Okay, great.
Now, what skills or talents are essential to being effective at your job?
Oh my gosh. Well, I would say persistence is key.
Good.
Like anybody, I think sometimes I get discouraged. Things don't always go the right way. And I've been admiring, I won't say who it is, but I reconnected with a young woman from China who's come here and in a very short period of time has gotten, I think, 3 films made now, and just brings great energy, a real belief in herself, and a consistent, persistent attitude, and persistent in the right way, not pushy. I would say generally polite, but firm and getting things across. So that's, I don't know if you'd call that a skill. I think it's more of an attitude, but right. That's really important anywhere you work and in any kind of work, and especially in movies, which, require constant pushing, as right. I'm sure.
Right.
I think an empathy with other people and an ability that's key. Just getting people to go along and being able to sell my ideas. And a big part of that is hearing what people want and what they need and listening very carefully. Essentially what I'm saying is people skills, really.
Right.
But that encompasses a lot. For me, the most important sort of people skills are being an ability to put myself in other people's place, seeing things through their eyes, understanding and really asking lots of questions about what they want, what they need, and sometimes that means sort of listening between the lines, and they may be saying one thing or not even knowing exactly, but being able to suss out what somebody needs, and then thinking about how I can help to solve that problem and or that challenge and fulfill the needs that they have. And that's important because that's how you sell projects. That's how you raise money. That's how I think it's essential to getting anything done.
Exactly. That's a key thing. Know what your partner needs, because then you can work together.
Yeah. Too often what I've seen, and I think it's changed somewhat, but still you see a lot of people here in Hollywood, let's say, who look at China as both a source of capital and a market for their own films. But it's hard to get anywhere if that's all, if you're not offering an equal value in return.
That's a key point. Now, this next question is a little bit of a tricky question. What question did I not ask you that I should have?
Oh, okay. Boy, I guess I get really drawn into political stuff when maybe I shouldn't, but I think what's happened over the last weekend and the last few days in China, what does that signify for us as overseas producers trying to work in China? What I'm referring to specifically is the government has now made the president a president for life, and there are no more. They've been 5-year terms and term limits, and now he's essentially a dictator, and it's just another step in the direction, the opposite direction of democracy. And so along with that, there's been a lot of moves to clamp down on interaction with foreigners and more looking inward. And so what does that mean for all of us who want to do business there? And I think it's I don't want to raise an alarm bell or anything. This has been going on for years, and there's still opportunity, and I'm still optimistic about China. But I would say it worries me at the same time.
Yes. Well, conversely, they want to export their soft power or create soft power. So unless those movies can cross borders, I don't see how that's going to happen.
Yeah, that's right. I believe the Chinese Communist Party, still need to benefit from the skills that people like you and I and the people we know can bring to China. And they haven't stopped that, but it's just gotten more challenging over the last few years under this administration.
Well, this is where persistence helps.
Yes, there's always a way.
Yes, right.
There's always a way.
Right, good. Now, this last question is, what advice can you give those aspiring to tap into the Chinese market? You've been giving us advice all along, but just to sum it up. Well,
this is the kind of thing you can't dabble at. It's hard to be successful if you make it a part-time hobby. Really, I've made it my life's focus. That doesn't mean I don't do other things. I'm going to India next week, and I've worked in Russia and other places. But I'm always learning about China. I'm always, pretty much every day, I'm talking to someone there in China or to someone here about China projects. It's a pretty much a full-time pursuit. And for me, fortunately, because I prefer to live in LA, I've been able to do that from here. But I've lived over there a couple of times, and that's important too, being on the ground in China. And I've invested a lot of time getting to know the lay of the land and the culture, and developing a lot of relationships by spending lots and lots of time there. And that, to me, is very important. If you don't have that ability or that luxury, you need to find ways to connect with people here. So here in LA, for instance, there's a really big community of people who are focused on doing work in China, and there are lots of events and lots of ways to network with people. And I do that too, and I recommend that. But hopefully, you do get a chance to get over there and spend some time. and it can be really rewarding because, as I said earlier, I find that it's much more open in China. It's easier to get in front of people and meet people, and there's a fluidity and an energy there that we don't quite have here.
Oh, well, that's inspiring. Now, in conclusion, would you like to share any social media details or website links?
Let's see. Well, I haven't written anything on it in a while, but I have a blog that a lot of people have found useful called China Film Biz.
Okay.
BIZ. And it's at ChinaFilmBiz.com. So there's about 200 or so articles there that I've written about China and the China business and how to do business there. Almost all of it related to film, some of it to TV and other things. I've also written several hundred articles in Forbes, and I think it's Forbes.com/Rob Cain, ROBCAIN. Forbes.com/sites, SITES/Rob Cain.
Okay, I'll put that in the show notes.
And what else can I tell you? I mean,
any social media that you want to share, or we'll just leave it at the ChinaFilmBiz.com. I'll put this in the right address in the show notes and the Forbes address.
Well, if anybody's listening and wants to, is interested in having a chat with me, I can also, offer my email address. That's Rob, R-O-B, at PacificBridgePics.com. Pacific, like the ocean bridge with a B, and then PICS.com.
Great. Well, Rob, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure the audience has too.
Me too.
Okay. And we'll see you at the premiere.
Thanks, Karen.
I've got 3 key points, as always. Number 1, Rob said it's getting trickier to getting money out of China. Now, one thing Rob does is advise international firms on how to set up a company in China and find a Chinese partner. My 2 cents, get expert advice before you find a Chinese partner. Number 2, go to China. Rob mentioned that here in Los Angeles, the film industry tends to be hierarchical. But in China, that's not necessarily the case. You can call up executives and set up meetings more easily in China than in the U.S. I found this true to be true for myself as well. Number 3, Rob mentioned a problem he'd like to solve is to get the Chinese film executives to appreciate quality screenplays with empathetic characters, obstacles, and 3-act structures. I wrote a blog post about the difference in Chinese and American screenwriting, and you can see the show notes on that. But Rob was very clear how he said he didn't think China was making good movies at all, unless occasionally by accident. Now, Rob compared South Korea's government and how they loosened up their control of the entertainment business, which resulted in globally appealing films, music, and TV. The Chinese government, as we all know from the news, is taking more control. On the macro side, the government level, there's really nothing you can do or I can do. But on the individual level, if you want to make a film or to make projects for China, they must be designed from the ground up to appeal to a Chinese audience. You can't shoehorn an American script, for example, change the names and locations, and expect Chinese producers or the Chinese audience to be interested. Now, for the takeaways, I have 3. Number 1, Chinese love WeChat. So get a WeChat address and put it on your business card. Recently, I was at the Hong Kong Film Market, and believe me, everybody uses WeChat. Number 2, maintain your database of contacts. I know I've met an amazing amount of Chinese film executives, and I'd like to pose a question to the audience. Which CRM, customer relationship management app, do you find the best? Currently, I use Insightly, but I'm open to suggestions. And number 3, Rob mentioned this, and I've heard this from several professionals, about how Chinese filmmakers chase last week's blockbuster and try to copy it. If rom-coms were dead 2 years ago, but they were hot last week, then let's shoot a rom-com. Or now, several Chinese producers are rushing to India to grab some magic, like magic from the films, for example, Dangal or Secret Superstar. But in my opinion, if you chase the market, you're already 2 years behind because it will take that long to get your film on screen. Don't chase the market. Write what you're passionate about in your original voice. But to appeal to a Chinese studio, your script can't be so one of a kind that your Chinese investors has no easy comparables. It's the old cliche, it's got to be the same, but different. As Rob said, action films are always in demand. Sci-fi and comedies, and that's Chinese comedies, and I believe that's rather tricky for an American writer to pull off, can work. However, I myself stick with action, but in my scripts, the lead is female. What works for me is to follow the rule when it comes to story, the same but different. The quote, same, quote, for me, is action films, and the quote, different part is my action films are female-led, and unlike most action films, my target audience is women. The same but different. Thank you for listening. To show your support, please go to iTunes, subscribe, and leave a rating so other people can find the podcast. By the way, I'm looking for guests to be on the podcast, so spread the word. And if you'd like to join the podcast or recommend someone, send me an email at podcast@China-Hollywood Greenlight.com. And I'll see you at the premiere. Bye. 一会儿见.